The Golden Lagos sun dipped behind the skyline of Banana Island, painting the glass towers in hues of amber and fire. Inside the sleek, angular estate of Kendrick Khalifa, everything gleamed. Chrome fixtures, spotless marble floors, glass walls that gave way to a breathtaking view of the water. But the man who owned it all stood in silence, gripping the rail of his upstairs balcony, eyes fixed on one person. Antonia Idowa. She was hurrying down the stairs outside the villa, a pair of nylon bags swinging at her sides. Her steps were quick, her eyes darting toward the gate, unaware that Kendrick was watching from above. Antonia. His voice cut through the soft breeze, calm but tinged with quiet suspicion. She froze. Then slowly, she turned. Her face registered surprise. "Yes, sir?" she asked, adjusting the bags in her grip. Kendrick descended the steps of his penthouse, linen shirt open at the collar, barefoot on imported tiles. "Did I forget something?" she asked nervously, brushing a braid off her shoulder. His eyes dropped to the bags. They weren't heavy, but they were full. "What's inside those?" She hesitated. "Just groceries I picked up at lunch." He nodded, but his gaze remained locked on her. "You've been leaving early a lot lately. Always saying it's your mom, that she's ill." Antonia nodded quickly. "Yes, sir, I've told you. She's not well. I've been trying to manage things the best I can." Kendrick stepped a little closer. "I overheard you on the phone yesterday. You were speaking in Igbo. You mentioned needing urgent money?" Antonia's lips parted slightly. She blinked fast, her fingers tightening on the nylon handles. I don't understand what you mean." "I'm not asking," Kendrick replied, his voice sharpening just enough. "I'm telling you, something's going on." The space between them pulsed with something unspoken. Antonia looked down, then lifted her chin. "If you don't trust me, maybe you should hire someone else to clean your house." And just like that, she turned, sandals whispering against the stone path, and slipped through the gate. Kendrick stood motionless. The breeze from the lagoon rustled the palms, but inside him, everything was still. Too still. Back inside, the silence wrapped around him like wet concrete. His house was a museum of wealth, glass art, sleek furniture, and not a single picture on the walls. He poured a glass of aged bourbon, but it did little to calm him. Through the floor-to-ceiling window of his study, he watched the streets of Victoria Island below, chaotic, alive, everything his home was not. Antonia had worked for him for 8 months, quiet, efficient, always respectful. She cleaned, she watered the plants, she kept to herself. But now, something felt off. He opened his laptop and pulled up her file. Name, Antonia Idowa. Age, 27, hometown, Nsukka, employment. Start date, 8 months ago. References, verified ID, checked. Still, something was too clean. Too neat. Her schedule had gaps, weekends unaccounted for, frequent early exits. No one had ever questioned it. Until now. Kendrick leaned back, guilt briefly brushing past his conscience. She had never given him a reason not to trust her. And yet, here he was. He remembered something odd. A rainy day earlier that week, Antonia had entered soaked to the bone. She'd hung her coat on the hallway rack, and without thinking, Kendrick had offered to move it somewhere warm. His hand had brushed against something in her pocket, a folded receipt. Now he crossed to the rack, reached into the coat, and pulled out the crumpled slip. A bank transfer receipt, 200,000 naira, sent to an account in Nsukka. Name on account, Ioma Idowa. His chest tightened. Her mother? So maybe she was telling the truth. Or maybe not. He stared at the slip, then placed it on the granite counter, a storm of doubt raging in his mind. Tomorrow, he would ask her, but part of him already knew. Antonia wouldn't give him a straight answer. She was too quiet, too guarded. And people like that, Kendrick knew, always carried more than what showed on the surface. He downed the rest of the bourbon and exhaled. She was just a maid. But why did it feel like she was hiding an entirely different world? Friday evening rolled in like warm silk over the city, the sun casting a honeyed glow over Banana Island. Inside the polished estate of Kendrick Khalifa, all was pristine, but Kendrick was far from calm. Antonia had just finished cleaning the dining room. She wrung out the mop, her movements fluid and efficient. Then she looked up and said quietly, "Sir, I'll be heading out now. My mother has a hospital checkup in the morning. I also have some things to handle tonight." Kendrick nodded slowly, concealing the growing churn in his chest. "All right, take care." But the moment she stepped out and closed the gate behind her, he picked up his car keys. Something in him wouldn't rest. He had trusted too easily before, and the cost of betrayal was something he no longer paid lightly. 10 minutes later, Kendrick sat inside a matte black SUV, parked 2 buildings down, hidden behind tinted glass. His eyes scanned the street as Antonia reappeared, now dressed in a simple t-shirt and jeans, a small bag slung over her shoulder. She didn't call a ride. She didn't hail a cab. She walked confidently to the end of the road and boarded a yellow Danfo bus headed toward mainland Lagos. Ajagunle, Kendrick's eyes narrowed. What was she doing all the way out there? He started the engine and tailed the bus at a careful distance, navigating through the city's pulse. The blaring horns, street hawkers weaving between cars, the smoky scent of grilled suya wafting in from roadside stalls, but he barely noticed. His attention was locked on her. Antonia sat by the bus window, arms folded, staring blankly ahead. She looked like someone with a purpose. Over an hour later, the Danfo halted in a cramped street on the outskirts of Ajagun. Kendrick parked discreetly at a corner, engine off. He watched as she stepped down, adjusted her bag, and disappeared into a side street. He followed on foot. The area was buzzing. Kids darted between kiosks, men shouted over football scores, radios blared high-life music from cracked speakers. Kendrick kept his distance, weaving through the crowd with silent precision. Antonia finally stopped in front of a rundown building. Its faded blue sign read, Umeji Community Center, Evening Literacy Program, Food Support. Kendrick blinked. She entered without hesitation. He crossed to the opposite side of the street, stood behind a cracked wall, and peered through the dusty windows. The building was small, its walls patchy and old. But inside, it was alive. Dozens of men and women sat on benches and plastic chairs. Some held worn notebooks, others clutched pencils with reverence. And standing at the front of the room was Antonia. Her voice rang gently through the air. "Repeat after me. How are you?" The class responded, their voices staggered but full of effort. She moved between them with patience and warmth, correcting pronunciation, offering praise. She even laughed, a soft, melodic sound Kendrick had never heard in his mansion. When an elderly man fumbled over the word hospital, she crouched beside him and coached him with kindness. Kendrick stood frozen. This wasn't a secret life. It was a second one. A life of purpose, of giving. She wasn't leaving early to lie or steal. She was teaching, volunteering, after scrubbing his marble floors for hours. Back in his study that night, Kendrick sat at his desk, staring at nothing. The bourbon on the counter remained untouched. He opened his laptop again and typed, Umeji Community Center, Ajagunle about us. The webpage was basic. White background, clunky fonts, outdated design. But the message was powerful. We provide free evening English lessons for low-income adults and rural migrants. Most of our students never finish primary school. Some are artisans, some traders, some housekeepers. All deserve a second chance. There were photos, blurry, poorly lit, but unmistakable. Antonia was in nearly every one. Smiling, hugging students, unpacking food bags, reading a children's book to grown men and women, her lips shaping each syllable with care. And then one line stood out. We survive on donations and volunteer work. Currently, rent is overdue. Food and supplies are covered by volunteers from their own pockets. Kendrick stared at the screen. The shopping bags, the urgency. It all made sense now. She was never hiding something dark. She was hiding something beautiful. He closed the laptop and sat back, the silence of the mansion pressing on his chest. She had never once asked for help. She had simply done what needed to be done, with grace, with silence, and with a strength he'd rarely seen in anyone. And here he had been, suspecting her. He reached for his phone and dialed his assistant. "David," he said quietly, "run a full report on the Umeji Community Center. I want to know how much they owe, what it costs to run the place monthly, and how many people it serves each week." David's voice came groggy. "Boss, it's almost midnight. Are you okay?" Kendrick stared out the window toward the dark, glittering skyline. "No," he said softly, "but I want to be." By morning, the weather in Victoria Island had shifted. A soft coastal breeze moved through the open-plan kitchen of Kendrick Khalifa's penthouse, fluttering the linen curtains ever so slightly. But the man himself was wide awake long before sunrise, staring blankly at the glass wall overlooking the water. The report from David had come in by 7:30 a.m. sharp. Umeji Community Center audit summary. 2 months rent unpaid, roof leaking in 2 places. No steady funding or sponsorship. Supplies purchased weekly by volunteers. Antonia Idowa listed as lead volunteer unpaid. Confirmed. She worked 3 jobs. Kendrick read that part twice. E3. By day, his housekeeper. On weekends, a cashier at a small supermarket. By night, a volunteer English teacher in Ahigum. All this time, she never once asked for a raise, a favor, or help. His chest tightened as he thought of the countless nights she left his pristine home, after mopping the floors, wiping counters, and arranging fresh lilies in the foyer, to go give herself to people who had almost nothing. And what had he done? Suspected her, questioned her integrity. Kendrick stood from his desk and looked around at the opulence he'd built, a 5-bedroom penthouse filled with stillness. A place that once symbolized his power now felt more like a palace of echoes. Downstairs, Antonia was already in the kitchen, folding dish towels neatly beside the stove, her hair tied up in a black satin scarf. She didn't expect him so early. He never came down before 9. But this morning, Kendrick walked in wearing a loose shirt, coffee in hand, his expression unreadable. "Good morning, Antonia," he said quietly. She turned around startled, then straightened. "Good morning, sir. I was just finishing up. I'll get out of your way." He shook his head. "Actually, could you sit down for a moment?" She hesitated. He never asked her to sit. Ever. But something in his tone made her pause. She wiped her hands and lowered herself onto the edge of a dining chair. Kendrick took the seat opposite her. For a moment, there was only the sound of the wind rattling faintly against the windows. "I know about the Umeji Community Center," he said gently. Antonia froze. Her fingers curled instinctively around the edge of her apron. "Sir, I don't know what." "I followed you," Kendrick admitted, his voice quiet but firm. "Last night, I saw where you went. I saw you teaching, helping those people. I saw the food, the smiles." He looked down for a second, ashamed. "I thought you were hiding something. And you were, but not in the way I imagined." Her lips parted slightly. Her eyes welled up. "You followed me?" He nodded slowly. "I had to know." Antonia looked away, her voice barely a whisper. "I wasn't hiding it. I just didn't think it mattered." "It matters," Kendrick said, the words coming with surprising conviction. Silence fell again, but this time it was warm, not uncomfortable. He leaned forward. "I read about the center. I saw the website. I know you work there every evening after you leave here. I know you do weekend shifts at the supermarket, all to keep that center alive." Antonia blinked fast, then wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. "I couldn't just walk away," she said quietly. "Most of them, they've never had the chance to learn. They're proud people, but they just want to belong, to speak, to feel seen." Kendrick listened, really listened. They're farmers, masons, nannies, but the system treats them like they're invisible because they can't speak perfect English. Her voice cracked. I use my salary here to buy bread and fruits for them, just something to keep them going while they learn. Kendrick's heart ached. He had spent years building walls around himself, convinced that everyone had a motive, that kindness was a front, and trust was currency to be rationed. But here was this woman, this quiet girl who swept his floors and arranged his bookshelves, giving her entire self away for free, night after night. Antonia, he said softly, you've given more than people earning 10 times your income. She looked up in surprise. Sir? He smiled faintly. I just wanted you to know. I see you now. For a few seconds, she didn't speak. Then she looked down at her hands and whispered, thank you. 3 days later, the center in Ihigunle buzzed like a hive. Students arrived early, plastic chairs were scrubbed, and old posters were replaced. There was a sense of energy in the air. Antonia had barely set down her tote bag when the elderly coordinator of the center, Mama Titi, came hurrying down the hallway, her wrapper flapping behind her, a folded paper trembling in her hand. Antonia! Antonia, come! You won't believe it. What is it? She asked, rushing toward her. Mama Titi held up a printed bank slip. 5 million naira, she shouted. Child, 5 million. Antonia's eyes widened. What? It came into our foundation account this morning. Anonymous. No name, no message, just 5 million and the words, we believe in your mission. Antonia's hand flew to her mouth. Her legs wobbled. She looked up toward the ceiling, eyes brimming. Oh my God, you heard me, she whispered. You really heard me. That evening, the Umeji Community Center was aglow with energy and joy. Volunteers buzzed with excitement, students laughed more freely, and the aging walls of the building almost seemed to stand taller. Plans were already unfolding. Fix the leaking roof, repaint the classrooms, purchase new textbooks and tablets for adult learners, and finally install working ceiling fans for comfort. Antonia moved from group to group, smiling, nodding, assuring everyone it was real, the money was truly theirs. She didn't know who had sent it. All she knew was that the donation came like a miracle. Across the street, hidden behind the tinted windows of a black SUV, Kendrick sat quietly watching her. She was radiant in this place, free, alive. He had transferred the 5 million early that morning. No name, no expectations, no strings. Just the words, we believe in your mission. Now seeing her laugh and guide her students with such warmth, he felt something loosen in his chest, a heaviness that had weighed him down for years. He hadn't felt like this in a long time. Like he mattered. The next morning, Kendrick entered the kitchen as Antonia was arranging a bouquet of orange lilies in a ceramic vase. She looked up startled. You're up early again, sir. He gave a half smile. You make it look peaceful here. She smiled faintly and resumed arranging the stems. He watched her for a moment, then walked to the espresso machine and started brewing 2 mugs. I made ginger tea, he said after a minute, holding one out to her. Antonia hesitated. For me? He nodded. I thought you might like it. She accepted the cup with both hands. Thank you, sir. Call me Kendrick, he said, meeting her eyes. She paused, then said softly, Okay. Kendrick. They both chuckled lightly at the awkwardness. Something shifted in that moment. The formality cracked just a little. They sat in silence, sipping tea across the counter. Then Kendrick spoke again. Can I tell you something I've never told anyone in this house? She looked up curious. Of course. He stared into his mug. My parents died when I was 22. Plane crash. They were returning from a business trip in Ghana. Antonia's features softened. I'm so sorry. He nodded slowly. They left me everything. Shares, the estate, staff. But I lost more than I gained. Since then, I built walls. I figured if I stayed alone, I wouldn't lose anyone again. Antonia was quiet for a moment. Then she said softly, Sometimes the silence we build to protect ourselves becomes louder than the pain we're running from. He looked at her, surprised. You understand that? She nodded slowly. At the center, most of us do. People who've lost families, homes, even their voices. We built a new family together. He smiled gently. A chosen family. Yes, she whispered. Sometimes the people who love you most aren't the ones you're born to. They're the ones who stay when you have nothing. Later that week, Kendrick couldn't stop thinking about her words. Invisible brilliance, chosen family, giving without being asked. That morning, he found her again at the kitchen table at dawn, surrounded by books, papers, and a blinking, rechargeable lamp. She was scribbling furiously on lined paper, her lips moving as she read silently to herself. He stepped closer. "Antonia?" he asked gently. She jumped. "Oh, good morning, sir. Kendrick, I didn't hear you." "What are you working on?" She tried to gather the papers quickly, flustered. "It's nothing important, just something I've been working on." He smiled gently. "You're writing at 5:30 in the morning. That doesn't look like nothing." She sighed and laid the papers down. "I'm finishing my final thesis. For school." Kendrick blinked. "School?" "I'm studying for a diploma at Lagos City College. Evening classes. After volunteering." He lowered himself into the chair opposite hers. "What's the thesis about?" She hesitated, then handed him the cover page. He read aloud. "Invisible brilliance. Why skilled Nigerians from rural areas are forced into survival jobs in the city." Kendrick looked up, stunned. "This is incredible." Antonia gave a shy smile. "It's something I've seen too often. People with real skills, bakers, midwives, mechanics, but because they don't speak polished English or have a certificate, they end up cleaning floors or selling plantain on the roadside." Kendrick nodded slowly, deeply moved. "I've seen that happen too." She continued, voice steady. "Mama Grace was a seamstress in Enugu. Here in Lagos, she scrubs office toilets. Another friend, Uncle Kola, was a technician back in Kogi. Here, he pushes wheelbarrows at mile 12. Her eyes burned now, not from tears, but fire. They're not unskilled, they're just unseen." Kendrick listened, heart stirred. This woman wasn't just cleaning his house. She was building a movement. She didn't just care about the world, she was trying to change it. That afternoon, the atmosphere inside the Khalifa estate was quiet, but not cold. A calmness had replaced the guarded tension that once existed between them. Antonia was in the dining room, carefully arranging fresh calla lilies in a glass vase. Kendrick stepped in quietly, holding a sleek brown file. She turned at the sound of his footsteps, her fingers still tangled in the stems. "Sir?" she asked, brows rising. He placed the file gently on the table between them. "I've been thinking a lot about our conversation," he began. "About your thesis. About your work." She looked at the file, unsure. "I run a foundation," Kendrick said. "You probably didn't know. It's modest, focused on education, youth empowerment, and supporting underserved communities." She nodded slowly. "I didn't know that. I've decided I want to expand it. Do more, build programs that reach deeper, but I don't want to do it alone." He paused. "I want you to help lead it." Antonia blinked. "Lead it?" He slid the file toward her. "I'm offering you the role of Community Outreach Director full-time. Salary, resources, flexibility to still support the center, and enough to help your mother through her final year of treatment." Her fingers trembled as they touched the file. She opened it and saw a full breakdown. Job description, stipend, mission outline, support plan for adult literacy projects. I don't know what to say." Kendrick smiled softly. "Say yes." But Antonia didn't. She sank slowly into one of the dining chairs, the file still open in her lap. Her heart raced with gratitude, but also uncertainty. For months she had mopped these floors and taught in leaking classrooms. She'd spent years in the shadows, building something from scraps. And now, this? A job, a title, a seat at the table. "I'm grateful," she whispered, eyes still on the papers. "I really am, but..." Kendrick's expression shifted gently. "You're afraid." "Yes," she admitted. "Afraid of stepping away. afraid of leaving the day-to-day work, of feeling like I'm choosing comfort over purpose. He nodded. You think if you're not at the center every day, you'll lose the heart of it? She nodded, eyes now wet. They're my family, the students, Mama Titi, the kids. We built something together. I don't want to abandon that. Kendrick leaned forward. It's not either or, Antonia. This job isn't to pull you away. It's to push your impact further. You'll still be you, just with more reach, more tools, real power to change things. She looked down at her hands, silent. Part of her whispered, this is what you've worked for. Another voice said, don't forget who you are. After a long pause, she looked up. Can I think about it? Of course, Kendrick said gently. Take all the time you need. The days that followed were strange, not in words, but in everything unsaid. Where once there was laughter over shared tea and long conversations by the window, now there were polite greetings and silence. Good morning, sir. Good morning, Antonia. That was it. No more pauses. No more questions about his day. No more lingering moments in the kitchen. Kendrick noticed. He felt it in his bones. He had opened a door to her future, and maybe, just maybe, he had asked too much. Maybe she wasn't ready to walk through. On a rainy Friday afternoon, Antonia knocked softly on the door to his study. Raining, Kendrick looked up from his laptop. The air felt heavier than usual. She stepped in, an envelope in her hand. I just came to say, I'm giving my notice. His throat tightened. 2 weeks? She nodded. Yes, sir. You're leaving? I want to try something new. Give more time to the center and myself. Kendrick nodded slowly. Okay. There was a long pause. Then she added almost in a whisper, thank you for everything, for believing in me, for seeing me. He looked up at her, really looked, and in her eyes he saw both sadness and resolve. Antonia, he said quietly, whatever you do next, I know you'll change lives. She smiled faintly. That means more than you know. The next 2 weeks moved like honey, slow, thick, sweet with memories and regret. Kendrick watched her as though memorizing everything. The soft hum she made while folding laundry, the careful way she tied her head wrap, the way she whispered to plants as she watered them. He wanted to stop her, to say stay, but he didn't. Because love, he realized, was not a cage. It was a choice. And she had earned the right to choose her next chapter. One evening, just before she left for the day, Kendrick knocked on the door of her quarters. He handed her a brown envelope. Inside were 3 letters of recommendation, each glowing, personal, and signed by industry leaders. She looked up stunned. These are beautiful. He smiled faintly. They're true. She blinked quickly, trying not to cry. I don't know what to say. Say you'll keep in touch. I will, she whispered. They stood in silence. 2 people on opposite sides of a goodbye. A full month had passed since Antonia walked out of Kendrick Khalifa's estate for the last time. And yet, her presence lingered. In the folds of the curtains she once arranged, in the perfect angle of the orchids in the foyer, in the faint scent of lavender she always used when mopping the floors, and most painfully, in the silence. Kendrick's mornings had become longer. He drank his tea in solitude now. He still sat by the glass wall overlooking the lagoon, but it didn't feel serene anymore. It felt empty. She hadn't called. Not once. He'd told her to keep in touch, but maybe that had been a polite way to part. Perhaps she was moving on, building a new chapter without him. He wanted to respect that, but he couldn't lie to himself. He missed her. Not just the woman who cleaned his space or brewed his tea, but the woman who challenged his silence, who taught him how to see beyond wealth and legacy. The woman who saw dignity in the overlooked, who lit up when she spoke about adult education and the strength of people without titles. The woman who made him want to become a man and worthy of more than his bank account, On a breezy Saturday, Kendrick sat in a black linen shirt on the edge of his rooftop terrace, staring at the skyline when David, his assistant, called. "Sir, you're on the guest list for the Voices of Hope Gala at Echo Atlantic this evening, hosted by the Adult Literacy Coalition. You asked me to RSVP last month." Kendrick blinked. He'd forgotten. Still, something stirred in his chest. "Is Antonia Idowa speaking there?" he asked. A pause. Then, "She's the opening speaker." His heart skipped. "I'll be there," Kendrick said quietly. By 7:45 p.m., the ballroom at the Echo Atlantic Grand Marquis pulsed with elegance. Crystal chandeliers glittered above. Lagos's wealthiest elites sat at round tables, covered in white satin and golden cutlery. The stage was set, with large banners that read, "Literacy is dignity. We read to rise." Kendrick entered quietly, dressed in a midnight black tuxedo. No entourage, no grand entrance, just him, a man walking into a room with one reason. He spotted her before she saw him. Standing on stage behind a podium, clad in a sleek navy jumpsuit that hugged her figure elegantly, her hair styled in a low bun, curls gently escaping around her face. Antonia looked calm, confident, nothing like the girl who once whispered apologies while cleaning under his glass coffee table. The room fell silent as she adjusted the microphone. She took a breath, then began. "When people think of intelligence, they often think of grammar, of accents, of certificates. But I've seen brilliance in a woman who sells pap on the roadside and can calculate interest faster than a banker. I've seen wisdom in a mechanic who reads slowly, but solves problems even engineers avoid." Kendrick's chest tightened. Literacy is not just about sounding educated. It's about access, dignity, empowerment. When you teach someone to read, you give them the tools to fight back against shame, silence, and poverty. A pause. "I used to scrub floors in a house I couldn't afford to dream about. I used to walk out at sunset and teach English with my clothes still smelling of bleach. Not because I was forced to, but because I believed people like me deserve more than pity. We deserve partnership." People clapped. Some stood. But Kendrick? He didn't move. He was too full. Of pride, of regret, of love. He loved her. He loved her with a clarity that came not from grand gestures, but from seeing her walk in her purpose. After the speech, Antonia descended the stage, her heart still thumping. She moved toward the back, overwhelmed by congratulations and polite handshakes, until her eyes landed on him, Wacked Kendrick. He was standing beside the marble pillar, eyes steady, hands in his pockets. No smile, just presence. Their eyes met, and the noise around them disappeared. She moved toward him, slowly. He didn't speak. He just offered her a small envelope. "What's this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your thesis," he said softly. "I had it published." She opened it gently, revealing a sleek, bound copy, her name embossed on the cover. Antonia gasped. "It's real," she breathed. Kendrick nodded. "And it's going into every literacy center we sponsor, starting next quarter." Tears welled in her eyes. "Why would you do that?" He took a deep breath. "Because you changed me, Antonia. You taught me that silence isn't strength, that service isn't weakness, that dignity isn't about how loud you speak, but who listens when you do." She looked away, trying to hold herself together. Then she turned back to him, voice shaking. "I missed you." His eyes softened. "I missed you too." They stood in silence again, but this time it was full. Then he said what he'd been holding for weeks. "I'm in love with you, Antonia." Her breath caught, not from surprise, but from finally hearing the words she had longed for. "I love you too," she whispered. 2 months later, the penthouse no longer echoed. Gone were the cold, museum-like silences and stiff morning routines. The space had changed, warmer throw pillows, soft jazz humming from the speakers, fresh amala-scented meals on Sundays, and laughter echoing from the balcony. Antonia now lived on the third floor, in a converted guest suite Kendrick had insisted she redesign to her taste. It wasn't about luxury, it was about presence, about choosing to build something real together. One Friday evening, Kendrick arrived home earlier than usual, dressed in a casual beige shirt and slacks. He walked into the kitchen and found Antonia barefoot, dancing as she stirred a pot of vegetable soup. She didn't hear him walk in. He leaned against the doorway, arms folded, just watching. She turned, startled. "You scared me," he laughed. "You cook and dance like someone who's hiding all the joy." She smirked. "Who says I'm hiding it? Maybe I'm just living it." He stepped closer, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "You're glowing." She turned away shy. "It's the heat from the soup." "No," he said gently. "It's the peace." She didn't reply, but the silence between them was its own kind of affirmation. Later that night, as the city lights twinkled across the lagoon, Kendrick brought her a folded piece of paper and placed it on her lap. "What's this?" she asked, curled beside him on the couch. "Open it." She unfolded it and gasped. A blueprint. A sleek, modern structure with glass walls, wide classrooms, reading corners, and digital labs. The Idowa Center for Adult Education in Victoria Island campus. Antonia looked up slowly, lips trembling. "You're building this?" "We're building it," Kendrick corrected softly. "Together." She blinked fast. "I don't deserve this." "Yes, you do," he said. "Not because you're perfect, but because you're brave. Because you stayed soft in a world that tried to harden you. Because you poured into people who had nothing to give you back." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "This is too much," she whispered. "No," Kendrick replied. "This is just the beginning." In the weeks that followed, they worked as a team. Antonia mapped out the curriculum, choosing everything from foundational English to financial literacy. She hired passionate instructors, some of them her old students, now ready to teach others. Kendrick handled logistics, permits, funding, architectural meetings, but more importantly, he showed up, every day, fully present. And slowly, the man who once believed in walls began to believe in windows, in transparency, vulnerability, in opening his life to someone else. One Sunday morning, under the wide mango tree at the Umeji Center, Kendrick stood beside Antonia as she addressed a group of students. "You believed in me before I believed in myself," she told them, "and now we're expanding, because of you." Someone from the back shouted, "Odogwu woman!" Laughter rippled through the crowd. Kendrick smiled. She had always been their light. He was just lucky to hold the mirror. That evening, as the sun dipped into the ocean, Antonia stood barefoot on the rooftop of the Khalifa estate, hair loose, arms wrapped around herself. Kendrick walked up quietly and slid a warm shawl over her shoulders. "Cold?" he asked. She shook her head. "Just overwhelmed." "Good overwhelmed?" She nodded. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a velvet box, and opened it. Inside sat a simple but elegant diamond ring. Nothing flashy, just timeless. Her breath caught. Kendrick. He didn't kneel. He didn't need to. "Antonia Idowa," he said quietly, "will you keep changing the world beside me, as my wife?" She laughed through tears. "I thought you'd never ask." He smiled. "I was waiting for the right moment." "And this is it?" He took her hand and kissed her knuckles. "This is everything." They didn't need fireworks or a public spectacle. They just needed each other. A maid and a mogul, a servant and a CEO, a woman who believed in invisible brilliance, and a man who finally saw it. Together they were proof that love isn't always loud, but it always shows up. The sky over Lagos shimmered like silk that morning, clear, golden, and utterly still. Banana Island was quieter than usual, as if the city knew something sacred was about to unfold. At the Khalifa estate, the entire compound had been transformed. White orchids spilled from arched walkways, soft violin music floated from hidden speakers, and guests in flowing aso-oke and sleek tuxedos milled around with champagne glasses in hand. But in the upper suite, Antonia Idowa stood alone in front of a mirror, her hands trembling. Oh! Her wedding dress wasn't extravagant. It was soft satin, long-sleeved with delicate embroidery at the hem. Her hair was swept into a low knot, adorned with tiny pearls. She looked like elegance had been written just for her. But beneath the glow, anxiety curled at the base of her spine. "I don't belong here," she whispered. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. It creaked open, and Mama Titi stepped in, wearing a proud yellow lace dress, her eyes brimming with warmth. "I knew I'd find you doubting again," she said softly. Antonia turned around. "They're all CEOs and dignitaries out there, bankers, oil barons. I used to clean Kendrick's windows, Titi." Mama Titi walked up and took her hands. "And now you're standing in front of them as a woman who built her own school, her own future, and her own love story. You're not less. You're more." Antonia's eyes welled. "What if I disappoint him?" "You've already given him what wealth could never buy. Peace," Mama Titi said. "You didn't come here to fit in. You came to rise." Downstairs, Kendrick Khalifa stood at the altar, surrounded by polished marble columns and a white satin aisle lined with rose petals. He wore a classic ivory tuxedo, his usually sharp expression softened by something far deeper than pride. Love. Real, aching, tender love. As the music changed, the guests rose. And then, she appeared. Antonia moved slowly down the aisle, her eyes locked on his. She didn't look like a stranger in a wealthy man's world anymore. She looked like someone who had claimed her space in it. When she reached him, Kendrick didn't speak right away. He simply held her hands, gazed at her like she was a poem he'd been waiting a lifetime to read. "You look like the answer," he whispered. "And you feel like home," she replied. The officiant spoke, but neither of them truly heard the words. The vows were simple, honest, intimate. Kendrick vowed to never let her dim to fit his world, and to expand his world to fit her fire. Antonia vowed to keep choosing love even when fear whispered otherwise. When they kissed, the guests erupted. And somewhere in the back, Mama Titi whispered to herself, "She did it. She turned service into power, humility into legacy. She loved and was loved right back." 6 months later, a new plaque gleamed at the front of a modern building in Victoria Island, the Idowa Center Center for Literacy Empowerment. Inside, adult learners gathered around computer screens, practicing CV writing and budgeting. Women in gala read poetry aloud. Retired artisans learned to send emails to their children abroad. Antonia walked through the halls in a navy blue power suit, her heels silent against the polished floor. At her side, Kendrick held her hand, not in dominance, but in solidarity. They had both changed. He smiled more. She stood taller. And their world, once separate, had now merged into something they never imagined. As they stepped into a sunlit classroom, a young girl stood to greet them. Her voice was clear, confident. "Welcome, Director Antonia. We finished our lesson early today. I even wrote my own speech." Antonia knelt down and smiled. "Let's hear it." The girl cleared her throat. "My name is Isioma. I used to be afraid. But now, I know I'm not too small to dream." Kendrick's chest swelled. He looked at his wife, eyes shining. Antonia leaned in and whispered, "This is what we built." He kissed her temple. "No, this is what you made possible." They stood there hand in hand, not as CEO and former maid, but as partners who found the extraordinary in the quiet and the forever in a simple act of kindness. And finally, Antonia Idowa was seen, not just as someone who once served, but as someone who now led.